Hi, it's Alaska Granny. I just finished reading this book, Soiled Doves, about prostitution in the early West by Seagraves. And I thought it was a fascinating book. I've always been interested in characters and why people would do what they do. And it never dawned on me until I read this that many of the women who were prostitutes in the early West, they were just like the men. They were looking for adventure. They were looking for wealth. They were following the trail of the excitement in the West. But a lot of them were actually the things that we think of, women that were caught in poverty and they couldn't just go get a job like women can today. And they may have been victims of circumstances. Perhaps they were married to a cruel man, or they were a widow and they had children to care for. And so there were many willing participants, but there were many that were seeking money and an alternative in a way to care for their families. And sadly, after they got to be a little bit older, then they would lose their attractiveness and then they wouldn't be as desirable. So their lives would tend to spiral into more seedier sides, and many of them, in fact, then their children were not welcomed in regular school. They were shunned by the community, and so many times their children ended up being sent away to live with relatives or sent to live in the poorhouse. So it's very sad because they weren't able to escape then their past. And then when other people started settling and bringing their wives and families and religion, then these women became complete outcasts where they had been accepted in the body communities of the earlier West. So then many of the women actually found a solution to the end of their problems as suicide, and they would overdose on things like laudanum, or however you pronounce it, laudanum or opium, or they would just take poison, and no one would care because they didn't consider them to be human beings. And but it was interesting because some of the characters, they're very well explained about their characteristics and why people liked them and were drawn to them. And there was one gal in here in Arizona that they said she mined gold better than digging for it because she was so successful at her trade. And one of the things that people don't understand is that these women cared for others. They made a point to take care of the sick and the injured in the community. And when some of their fellow prostitutes would die, they would make sure and help pay for their funeral because they never wanted any of them to end up being in a potter's field or just in a sad, unmarked grave. So they really were very caring women who had to put up with their lot in life, which wasn't always the best. And one chapter was about the Chinese immigrants who were actually brought here as slaves, and they didn't never speak English. They obviously, you could look and know that they were different. And so they were severely imprisoned and abused, kept in cages clear into the 1920s. And much of that was brought in by their own people, brought them, tricked them, and sold them into slavery, basically, into white slavery. So it was very, very sad. Anyway, one of the things in Tombstone, Arizona is the Birdcage Theater, and they talked about one gal and that a song was written, and they said she was only a bird in a gilded cage. Her beauty was sold for an old man's gold, which I thought was very interesting. So I found the characters in this book to be interesting, and it gives you a lot of information and understanding of what kind of things that some of the women in the early West needed to endure to survive. So I recommend this book to you if you're looking at characters and how they were able to deal with the problems and challenges of their lives. So leave me a comment on books that you enjoy, and please subscribe to the Alaska Granny channel. Have a wonderful day.